Are you listening? Damn. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And welcome into another episode of the Damn Podcast here on the 24/7 Sports Podcast Network and powered by BeaverBlitz.com. I'm your host, Carter Bahns, joined as always by BeaverBlitz.com publisher Angie Machado, and this week by Nathan Roderick of UteZone.com, going to help us preview Oregon State's upcoming matchup with number 12 Utah in Salt Lake City on Saturday morning if you're in Oregon, and Saturday afternoon if you are in Utah in that mountain time zone. Angie, I want to start with you and just kind of check in with you after what was an emotional roller coaster last weekend in Corvallis, and then we'll bring Nathan in here. Full disclosure, I have to check in for a flight in about 25 minutes out to Salt Lake City. So if I go radio silent in about 25, you know what I'm doing. But Angie, let's touch base with you, since we haven't heard from you since the instant aftermath of Oregon State's disappointing loss to USC last week.
Yeah, that was a rough one. But I'm excited. I hope the team has fleshed this as much as I have for the most part. I mean, I've seen a couple replays or little clips, and it makes me kind of, you kind of sit there and think what could have been. Oregon State had USC on the ropes, but new week. Another very, very tough opponent. Utah's who I actually picked in the Pac-12 media poll to finish first in conference. I think I've said I've had Utah 1, USC 2, Oregon State 3. That was my preseason. So I'm looking forward to a very, very good game. I don't like the 10 points. I'm not a bettor, but I think I'd almost take Oregon State in the 10 points because I think that's a little large of a spread. But yeah, I'm ready for a new week.
And to help us preview that game, we are reaching out to one of the experts along the 24/7 Sports Network. It's always fun to do that on Thursdays as we preview the upcoming game. And with us today is Nathan Roderick of UteZone.com, the Utah 24/7 affiliate. Nathan, first of all, thanks for joining us. And I guess let's kind of give you a little intro here. Tell us a little bit about yourself, where you're based, how long you've been covering Utah, and introduce yourself to all of the Beaver fans listening here on the Damn Podcast.
Yeah. My name is Nathan Roderick. Just actually graduated from the University of Utah in May.
Congrats.
With a degree in finance. But on the side, I love to talk Utah football, and I've been doing it for about 4 years now. Was with Rivals for a little bit, and then Steve Bartle recruited me over to the 247 site, and there's no looking back. I love what I do, and it's a fun when your team's really good. And it's been a good ride so far.
Just wait till your team gets really bad.
Yeah.
We'll see if you're saying the same thing.
Yeah, we'll see if I keep doing it.
We've covered a couple of 1-2 win seasons for Oregon State. So, hey, it's been fun looking at, I was looking back at what Oregon State did in my first year back in 2018, winning one Pac-12 game against Colorado, and where they're at now, going into a game against a highly ranked Utah team. And here we are saying, man, Oregon State's got a chance here to come out with a win and maybe crack the top 25 themselves. But as we know, Utah always poses a really, really difficult challenge for anyone, including Oregon State. The Utes have, except for last year, kind of dominated the series in recent years. So let's kind of dive into what the Utes are fielding this year. They're undefeated still. No, check that. They're undefeated after their season opener against Florida, going down into SEC country and losing that. But they haven't lost since, and they've looked good in doing so. Nathan, let's just get kind of your general thoughts on the way this season has started off for the Utes before we dive too deep into things.
Yeah, obviously it was a pretty disappointing start down in the swamp. Utah basically lost that one. Florida played really well, but I feel like Utah lost the game and Florida didn't really win it, just because Utah got stuffed on the 1 yard line. They threw a pick, in the red zone to finish the game. And it just seemed like the ball wasn't rolling in the Utes' favor that day. And they played okay. The defense, is young, and they played very undisciplined. and had a lot of missed tackles that we don't really see. And the offense played well. They had 450 yards of offense. They just couldn't get the ball in the end zone, which, has been lingering this season. Even last week, they haven't been able to perform very well in the red zone. But overall, since that loss in the Swamp, they've bounced back really well. They've played a couple bad opponents, but they've done what they needed to and handled business up to this point. The defense has stepped up. I think in the last couple games, they've only allowed over 163 yards combined over the last 3 games. So the run defense has really stepped up, and really looking forward to the rest of the season.
You mentioned that young defense, and obviously we know and we're familiar with some of the faces that are no longer on that defense. Devin Lloyd comes to mind. I mean, Nephi Sewell, just a long list of guys who are off to the NFL after putting together all Pac-12 and borderline All-American careers with the Utes. So speaking of that defense, which obviously, as you said, has performed about as well as it ever has in recent weeks, who are some of the guys who are stepping up in those guys' absence, and who's kind of the reason that the Utes haven't taken a step back there?
Yeah, I think that one of the biggest names to look out for would be Cole Bishop, the strong safety. Last week, he played really well off the edge. He's a strong safety, but he plays in the box a lot. They like to walk him up, and sometimes he looks like an outside linebacker, and he's played really well up to this point. Clark Phillips on the outside, you don't really hear his name often just because he gets put on an island and covers the team's best receiver, and you don't really hear about them the rest of the game because he does such a good job out there. And then in the middle, you want to look out for Junior Tafuna, who's a sophomore. He's a little bit lighter. Across the whole defensive line, this Utah team is a little bit lighter than they are in years past. And just because of recruiting, they're trying to get more athletic guys on the defensive front. And Junior Tafuna is one to look out for. He used to be a linebacker in high school, actually, and they beefed him up to be a defensive tackle and has played really well up to this point.
It's a Utah defense that Oregon State posted 42 on last year in that upset win at Reeser. Angie, I'll pass it off to you if you want to get involved here and throw a question at Nathan. But that's definitely a matchup that I'm watching for is, can Oregon State find similar success against a defense that we know has been one of the best in the Pac-12 over the last few years?
Yeah, I'm curious about, one thing when I think of Utah, I think of that stout defensive line. How is their defensive front this year? I mean, I think about all the great defensive tackles they're able to get, a lot of times going head-to-head with Oregon State and recruiting battles. How is that defensive front this year for the Utes?
So that first week against Florida, they really struggled. There's no ifs or buts about it. They struggled. They missed a lot of tackles. They missed a lot of assignments. They really struggled with the defensive ends. They got too far up the field and allowed Anthony Richardson just to scramble on the outside, and it made Anthony Richardson's job pretty easy. But since then, they've played really well, and they've played assignment sound football. Obviously, their competition hasn't been great. But that first week was really discouraging, to be honest. They are pretty young, sophomores and freshmen all over the defensive line. And, they didn't play well that first week, but since then have played really well. Another guy to look out for would be Van Fillinger, number 7. He slimmed up a little bit in the offseason and he's really fast off the edge, as well as Jonah Ellis and Gabe Reed are the other 2 defensive ends to look out for. It took them a little bit to get going this year, but since that first game, they were dynamite. They sacked Emory Jones 5 times last week. So it's not your typical Utah front where they're so big and they plug holes. They are more athletic and like to get in the backfield a little bit, but sometimes that has hurt them this year.
So I'm used to Utah, like you said, kind of being that attack from the edges. You're talking about how great the run defense is. If Oregon State is going to have a shot offensively, what do they need to do?
Yeah, I think, the Utah pass defense hasn't been tested that much. Anthony Richardson's a good quarterback, but he didn't really beat them over the top. And since then, they haven't faced a great quarterback or pass attack. So I'm really interested to see if Chance Nolan can get the ball downfield a little bit to test the young defensive backfield. They just haven't been tested at all, so we don't really know. And the last time they really got tested was in the Rose Bowl when, Jackson Smith and the Jigba was probably still running to this day. So I want to see how they respond to a good passing attack. I think Oregon State, could expose them on the outside maybe. As well as last year, you saw what happened in the running game. Oregon State just smashed them in the mouth, and Utah didn't really have much of a response. And the Beavers rushed for 260 yards. It's something that you've never really seen. But that's just, credit to Jonathan Smith and the culture that he's building and the type of team that he has, because they are so physical and they can go to a team like Utah and not be scared and just smack them right back in the mouth. So I think – go ahead.
I just think Jonathan Smith, I have a ton of respect for Coach Whittingham. And I really, Carter, you and I have talked about this, how we really feel that, the teams match up so well together. They're very physical. They're very blue collar, hard work. Maybe those 3-star recruits that maybe need some development. They're not going out getting flashy big names. Do you think that is good for Utah to face a team kind of like themselves, kind of a mirror image?
Yeah, for sure. I have so much respect for Jonathan Smith and what he's doing. And you talk about that development and everything. And, Carter mentioned Devin Lloyd. Devin Lloyd was a 2-star safety before he came to Utah. Turns into a first-round pick, and he was just named the Defensive Rookie of the Month in the NFL. So that just proves, how much development, happens at the University of Utah. So I don't want to say like Jonathan Smith is copying what Whittingham does, but they definitely have a similar blueprint where they're not going to get the 4 or 5 stars that USC and Oregon are getting. They're going to have to get the 3-star guys, develop the heck out of them and play really well. And so I'm interested to see how Utah will respond, to facing an underrated team like Oregon State. I think it can be an advantage for Oregon State as well.
I love that you bring those similarities up, Angie, because on Monday in Jonathan Smith's press conference, I kind of asked him a little bit about that. I was like, this every year when Oregon State takes on Utah, it feels like we talk ad nauseum about Kyle Whittingham, the job he has done. We ask Jonathan, what is it about what Kyle Whittingham does and the culture that he's built that has allowed him to build this Utah program up? And, I asked him, how much are you kind of following that same path in your own way at Oregon State? And he said, well, I've still got a long way to go. But there are a lot of similarities there. And so I think it's interesting every time Oregon State and Utah match up, because we do think of these two teams as very similar blue collar, player development type programs that aren't going to go out and win the flashy recruiting battles, but they're going to develop guys. And in most of the years past, we've seen that result in a lot of close games between these two programs.
Yeah, I agree. And I was talking to Steve Bartle, our editor, last night, and Oregon State is the team that nobody really wants to play in the Pac-12. Utah had that title for a while, and they probably still have a little bit of that title. But right now, Oregon State's that hungry team that is really physical. They have to go to Corvallis sometimes in a half Research Stadium, and no one really wants to play them. No one wants to get smacked in the mouth. They don't play the traditional West Coast football, which I love about Oregon State. But it's kind of, it feels like Oregon State, is like those younger Utah teams from 4 or 5 years ago, and they're just a couple guys away from making a big step into the conference and competing for the conference.
We've talked a bunch already about that Utah defense, how it's kind of carried the way for them. And in the past, I feel like Angie and I at least have felt like, maybe Utah relies a lot on its defense. The offense hasn't necessarily been on that same level, but since Cam Rising arrived early last year, when I think it was he won that job, that offense has looked about as quality as the defense, and we're not seeing kind of a one-dimensional team that we had in the past with Utah. So I'm curious how much improvement you have seen offensively in that program just in the short time that Cam Rising has been there, because it feels like this is a team that isn't just going to hold teams to 17 and rely on that to win. It feels like Utah can get into a shootout and win that type of game too.
Yeah, you're definitely right. And we saw that in the Rose Bowl. That's the definition of a shootout, going toe to toe with Ohio State. In the years past, Utah was carried by good defense, good special teams, and a good run game. But now Cam Rising, he's been so good because he can attack the defense through the air. He has some great tight ends to do so with. And Utah had Tyler Huntley for a few years, but I think Cam Rising is a little bit better and has a little bit more touch on the ball that Tyler Huntley didn't have, and has the ability to stretch the defense out a little bit that helps the run game. Utah still has a great run game. They're going to be run first. That's probably never going to change with Kyle Whittingham being the head coach. But having that aspect of being able to stretch the field a little bit, with Cam Rising has been great to see. He's had some great weapons that are gone now. Brenton Covey and Brant Keithy, who's out for the season. So that's like the big question mark going into this week is who's going to step up and who's going to be there for Cam Rising and be a security blanket, But Cam brings a lot of swagger and confidence to this team that, Utah has a little bit in the past, but nothing to the level that Cam brings to the team.
Yeah, I feel like it's even the playing field a little bit. I was really disappointed though to hear that Brant Keithy is out because I think he is such an electric player, and I hope speedy recovery for him. ACLs are never fun, but Oregon State is also without their top tight end and pass catcher in Luke Musgrave. So, who are the targets that Oregon State should watch? You mentioned the tight ends in general. Who does Oregon State need to be aware of with their secondary?
Yeah, the two biggest guys that Cam Rising is going to go to will be Devon Bailey on the outside, number 17, tall, fast receiver that has improved significantly. We talked about development earlier. This kid was a walk-on a few years ago and just has grown in the program and is a really good receiver now. And then the other would be the tight end, Dalton Kincaid. He had 2 touchdowns last week against Arizona State. He can stretch the field vertically and has great hands. And then behind that, that's kind of where the big question mark is. Who else is going to be, stepping up? A couple guys to look out for would be Money Parks. He's a slot receiver, number 10.
What a name!
Awesome
That's
name.
a good name.
Incredible name. So the sample size on him is very small, but he will probably play a little bit in the slot where Brant was playing. That's what's going to be so hard about replacing Brant is that he played tight end, he played in the slot, he even took some handoffs sometimes. So you need 3 different guys to replace just Brant. And so as far as a tight end spot, look out for Thomas Yasmin, number 87 from Australia, ex-rugby player. He got 1 catch last week and went for 72 yards. And so he's the guy that will step up in the tight end spot and likely get some targets there.
1 for 72 is pretty good efficiency in my book.
Yeah.
Oregon State and Utah traditionally, and especially in years past, or in the most recent years past, have been 2 teams that rely heavily on the tight ends. And I think, it's probably beneficial for both of those defenses to face that kind of offense in practice every day. I mean, Trent Bray at Oregon State was actually asked about that yesterday on Wednesday, how much of a lift or, how much of an advantage that defense gets facing the likes of Luke Musgrave, Jake Overman, Jack Velling, JT Byrne every day in practice. And he said, yeah, that does, very much prepare us for a team in Utah who likes to use their tight ends in the same way that we do. Of course, you mentioned with Keithy, I mean, even lining up as a running back sometimes. I mean, we saw that from Luke Musgrave last year too. He took a carry. So 2 teams that do like to use the tight ends in very unique ways. And I think it's going to be fun to see how they're utilized this weekend at Rice-Eccles.
So so I ask you opposite, if the defense, how is the offense? If Utah's going to win this game, or if Oregon State wants to stop Utah on offense, what do they need to do?
Yeah, just from film study that I've done on Oregon State, Utah started very slow against San Diego State a few weeks ago. They hardly moved the ball at all in the first quarter, just by attacking gaps and giving the offensive line confusing schemes. I think Oregon State does a good job of, keeping the offense on their toes and disguising blitzes and attacking gaps. I think Oregon State, has the potential to, really confuse the Utah offensive line, who didn't play very well last week even. They started the season very well, but these last 2 weeks have struggled. So they are pretty young up front, and I think the Oregon State defensive line and linebackers can confuse them with some stunts and blitzes and, weird alignments. I think San Diego State did a lot of that, and Oregon State can do something similar.
I worry about Cam Rising running on him.
Yeah.
That's what I worry about.
Yeah. So it's interesting you say that because Cam ran a lot against Florida, and it seems like they don't bring it out a lot just because they don't want him to get hurt, and they only bring it out when they're kind of desperate and, he's trying to stretch a play or on a 3rd down. So it'll be interesting to see how deep Utah goes in their playbook to stretch the field out and get Cam Rising going on his feet as well.
How much of Oregon State versus USC did you see? And I bring that up now because I think we see a lot of similarities between Caleb Williams and Cam Rising, just in their ability, not only as downfield throwers, but maybe they're not getting designed runs called for them all the time, but they have something there with their legs that makes them so difficult to bring down. And we saw Oregon State last week. I mean, the Beavers pressured Caleb Williams on seemingly every play. I mean, they had 11 quarterback hurries, but they only brought him down twice. So I'm curious how much of a similarity that you see there between Caleb Williams and Cam Rising, and how difficult do you think it will be for Oregon State's defense to get home against Rising?
Yeah, he's very elusive, and the offensive line has done a good job of protecting him so far. I mean, he didn't get sacked against Florida. Got us sacked a couple times against San Diego State, though. But what surprised me was how frustrated Caleb Williams got on Saturday. You could just see it in his face on the sideline. Lincoln Riley had to go console the guy multiple times. He was so confused. He was so frustrated. And it was really surprising to me. And I saw just on Twitter the other day that Caleb Williams is still mad. He's not even talking to the media right now. Like, the Oregon State defense really did a number on this guy. And I think that speaks to the secondary of Oregon State. They frustrated him. Obviously, they brought a lot of pressure. But the secondary of Oregon State is incredible. They play really well. They're long, athletic, and they did a great job of shutting down USC. And I feel bad for the Beavers just because anytime you give up 17 points to USC, I mean, you think you're going to win that game, right? But obviously they came up a little short. But I was really impressed by the Oregon State secondary for sure.
Kind of a bigger picture question here for you is, we'll only keep you for a couple more minutes, and I know you've got all sorts of stuff on your plate as you cover this game yourself, so we'll get you out of here before too long. But Utah hasn't really. You look at the schedule, and we mentioned their only losses to Florida. I feel like you look at that schedule and you say, man, the Utes haven't really played anybody that's tested them outside of Florida. I mean, that schedule you mentioned, they haven't really had those tough opponents there. So I'm curious, the one really strong opponent that they did play, they lost to. How telling do you think this game will be of where the Utes stand as we very quickly approach the midway point of this season? Do you feel like you've learned enough about the Utes at this point, and how much do you expect to learn this week?
Yeah, I think this will be very telling, especially how Oregon State beat these guys last year. It's gonna be interesting to see how they respond, to getting smacked in the mouth, because they didn't respond very well against Florida. And they lost to San Diego State last year as well, and responded very well this year, and just completely shut down San Diego State. However, they haven't seen anything like the Beavers up to this point. It's going to be really interesting to see, how they respond to getting hit in the mouth. Utah's always the one that, as soon as the whistle, the kickoff goes, Utah's the first person to punch them in the face, and they just kind of walk around with that swagger, like, we're physical, we're going to beat you, and we're going to beat you for 4 quarters. But Oregon State can keep up with them. So I'm really interested to see that. And I'm also interested to see how Oregon State responds being on the road. Just doing some research, they've struggled on the road in the past. I remember last year they beat Utah pretty handily, and then the next week they go on the road and lose to a pretty bad Cal team. So I'm really interested to see how Oregon State can respond to having such a big game last week, if that's going to have a hangover going into this week.
That's the $1 million question, I think, with a lot of people.
Yep. Anything else for Nathan, Angie, or should we get a prediction from him and get him out of here?
We can get a prediction and get him out, because you and I have some stuff to break down too.
Yep. All right, Nathan, your thoughts. You don't have to go on the record with a score or anything, but if you want to, lay it on us. And how do you see this thing unfolding at Rice-Eccles Saturday afternoon?
So I think this will be a very physical game. It's kind of going to be a weird one starting so early.
Yeah.
Maybe that'll affect the Beavers a little bit because it's starting at 11 a.m. out there. And like I said before, maybe they have a little bit of a hangover, from USC, because it took so much to even compete with those guys. And really want to see how much depth they have, because they'll be tired. They're playing at elevation. So I think Utah, pulls away in the fourth quarter. It's going to be a physical for about 3 quarters. I'm predicting like 27-17 for the Utes. And it could be closer. Vegas has this game at around 10, 11, I think. So I think it'll be around there, but I think it's going to be a great matchup, and it'll be really indicative for the rest of the season for both the Beavers and the Utes.
Very similar read on this game from Nathan Roderick of utezone.com that I have on this thing. So
I won't tell you where I'm at.
Yeah, we'll save that. We'll save that for the Beaver Blitz staff picks Friday morning. But you can actually read between now and then. We'll have Nathan's expertise up on the site as well in our Behind Enemy Lines feature this week. Nathan, we want to thank you again for taking the time out of your schedule to join us here on the podcast and break down the Utes.
Yeah, thank you guys, and hope you enjoy your time in Salt Lake City, Carter.
Appreciate it.
Thanks, Nathan.
Thanks, guys.
That is Nathan Roderick of utezone.com, generous with his time to join us here on the damn podcast. We love bringing guests on Thursdays to break down Oregon State's opponents, and we always get so much good insight from the 24/7 Sports Network. Angie, I'm not going to ask for your prediction yet, but I know it's a juicy one. It's a good one, and so we'll use that as a plug for BeaverBlitz.com staff picks tomorrow on Friday. I'm about a minute away from needing to check in for this flight. I'm on Southwest, so checking in right at time is really important. So with the next minute here, let's plug BeaverBlitz.com. Remind the listeners out there here on the damn podcast that BeaverBlitz.com is the place to be throughout Oregon State's football season for in-depth coverage of the Beavers on their quest to a Pac-12 championship. Angie, we ran a promo this week at Beaver Blitz. I don't know if it's still going, but if it is, I'll let you plug that.
It is not, but there is the first month for $1 if you want to come check us out. But believe me, you'll want to stay for the year because honestly, there's so much coverage, not only signing day coming in December, basketball season, baseball season, spring camp. Carter, it's a never ending time. We kind of have no downtime at Beaver Blitz. So join us. We would love to have you. The lodge is getting busier and busier. So what a great place to get in, discuss Beaver sports, recruiting. We have some really, really solid discussions there with some very knowledgeable people. We have parents online on the board. We have former players that stop in and give their insight. So just all in all, it's a great place to come and talk Oregon State sports. So Utah, Carter, did you get checked in?
Group A, position 51. Let's
Woo!
go.
I don't think you can get much better on Southwest because I think they save like the first 49 or something for.
Yeah, I will take that. I'm in Group B for I have to go through. I go from Eugene to Oakland to Salt Lake City, and I'm in Group B, position 36 to get out to Salt Lake City from Oakland. So not as good as Eugene. I'm expecting a very empty flight on the way down to Oakland, but people are not here to listen to my travel itinerary. So let's take a quick break on the audio side, and we'll be right back to take a deep dive into this game from an Oregon State perspective. The news from Corvallis this week. Jonathan Smith, of course, had his weekly press conference on Monday, outlined some of the injury updates. Really nothing of note there. Luke Musgrave and Trey Lowe remain out. We kind of expected that. We think that those will continue to be, more of the long-term type things, and Oregon State hopes to have them back towards the later part of the season. But all of the other injuries are kind of day to day. Smith's not going to go on the record and say, yeah, this guy's going to go, this guy's not with these injuries. But yeah, Angie, unless you've heard anything else since then that suggests otherwise, it's kind of just a wait and see type thing. I'm
actually pretty impressed because I thought OSU might come away, especially defensively, with a few more injuries against USC. Such a physical game, but Trent Bray said all's a go. Everybody's good, and so no, it is Musgrave and Trey Lowe. We still don't know. I've heard what injuries. Luke is not ready to be ruled out for the year, so that is a very good thing. Trey, I've heard it was an aggravation, so I know he's had some knee issues. I don't know if it's a knee issue. Nobody's saying, but again, he's not ruled out for the season week to week. So hopefully those guys can heal up. But in Musgrave's absence, I have to say I've been pretty impressed with, especially freshman Jack Velling. I've been pretty impressed. I think he's having some growing pains, couple false starts here and there, but I've been impressed with what I've seen from him so far.
Yeah, Jonathan Smith actually mentioned that on Monday that he's pretty impressed and proud of what he's gotten from Jake Overman, JT Byrne, and of course Jack Velling, as you just mentioned, in Musgrave's absence. We know that Oregon State has built up a ton of depth at tight end over the last couple of years. It has been one of the focal points of their recruiting, their recruiting plan since Jonathan Smith took over, and they've built a lot of young talent there, and we're starting to see some of that translate to the field. And I think getting Jack Velling out there as a true freshman was pretty cool to see. He had that 19-yard catch for a first down. I expect to see more of him this week, and I think Jake Overman slides into that blocking role like we have seen, and maybe you see more of Jack Velling as a receiver. But
JT Byrne too has been getting in, and I agree. I like Overman kind of in that Tegan Quatoriano blocking role, flex him out when needed. But do we
PM asks in the YouTube chat, do we see more Coletto as a blocking tight end? Hey, why not see him as a receiving tight end? I mean, he caught a 30-yard pass against USC. Interestingly, that was something that we saw some of in fall camp, and we were specifically told, formations, where guys are lining up, trick plays, and everything. Please keep that under wraps. So yeah, we had seen that coming a little bit. I'm not gonna lie. I was a little happy when I saw that come to fruition, because I was like, they've really been holding that one back. I want to see this. Every week I'm like, where's this Coletto tight end play? But we saw it against USC.
I also want to bring up, I can't highlight it, but Carter can. PM has, I would love to see Jam come out as RB1 against Utah. So this is one of my big things. And Carter went down to the Smith presser on Monday, and I wanted him to ask this question about the whole rotation thing. And this is why I'm not making the hundreds of thousands as a offensive coordinator. But Carter, what are your thoughts? I mean, Jonathan says he's committed to this whole rotation. And while I'm not opposed to, maybe having a third down back and bringing some guys in, I really want to see a guy get in rhythm. And it's not happening when you're pulling guys in and out. And, whether that's, I really do think Jam took a huge step right there against USC to make a play for that RB1. Nothing against Deshaun, nothing against Damian, but I loved how quickly he could hit the hole and he was gone instead of getting maybe tripped up at the line of scrimmage. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I'll give you Jonathan Smith's thoughts first.
I know, and I don't agree with it.
And he was asked. I didn't even get a chance to take the mic before this question was asked. So I know it was. I think a lot of people kind of saw it the same way that you did, and this was one of the very first questions that came up on Monday was, what's the balance between letting a guy just roll and get momentum and kind of build a rhythm at running back, riding the hot hand, versus rotating guys in so that you're not, nobody's getting too exhausted, and you've got all these different guys that do different things and you want to see them all. Where do you draw that line? And he said, we do like to ride the hot hand, and that was part of why Jam got so many looks against USC. And I read that as, Jam Griffin wasn't necessarily a huge part of the game plan, but then he had a couple of nice runs and they kept going with him. So I think we did see a little bit of that. I think we saw a little bit of Jam Griffin earn some more carries against USC, but at the same time, like you said, Deshaun Fenwick, Damian Martinez remained part of that rotation. And it's something that confuses me a little bit, just because I think if you're consistently getting 2 or 3 yards with Martinez and Fenwick, and it showed up mostly in the USC game. They had, been much more efficient early in the season, not to a BJ Baylor, Jamar Jefferson level of efficient, but more efficient than 2.5 yards per carry. But then Jam Griffin goes out and averages 7. And yet he's only getting a couple more carries than the other guys. I'm interested if it was a one game breakup from Griffin, or if this is, really what kind of running back he is. I lean towards the latter. I think it just took him a little while to get acclimated to that offense. And I expect him to show a lot more of what we saw from him against USC. But to your point, Angie, there does seem to be a little bit of a disconnect from, Jonathan Smith's perspective on how to manage this running back room, AJ Stewart and Brian Lindgren's approach to it as well, and what the fans are seeing and what the fans want to see.
And I get it. I mean, Jam did have more carries than everybody else, but it just seems like in crucial areas, Deshaun or that was Damian. And I heard that anybody getting exhausted. I'm sorry, these are like 18 to 22-year-olds that do this all the time. Quiz never got tired. BJ didn't get tired. They're not 50-year-old men out there trying to run every down. I don't know. I thought that was kind of a lame answer, but like I said, I'm a 40-something-year-old woman that doesn't run the ball. So
Here's one for you, though. Okay,
Okay.
so let's say you've got 4 guys in your running back room that you really like. Deshaun Fenwick, Trey Lowe, obviously injured, but is one of the best players on this offense when healthy. Damian Martinez, James Griffin. If you're a coach and you've got all of those guys, how afraid are you that if you settle with 1 or 2 of them, that your depth in the running back room is going to disappear via the transfer portal? How much of a role do you think that is playing in their management of this group?
That I think is about 98% of it, is they're trying to keep guys happy so they don't leave. But I don't know, there's other ways of doing it. God, at some point, put both of them in. Have a 2-back set at one point.
I think we saw that for one play.
We did. We saw one play.
USC.
I don't know. I just think there's ways of doing it. One of these guys should probably be turned into more of a third down back.
Damian Martinez, I think, has settled into a third down role.
Down, yeah.
That's pretty much exclusively where.
And when I see Deshaun Fenwick, I see a guy that he doesn't read the hole necessarily, the first hole, and he has gotten tripped up a lot. He's had some good runs, but I see him more as a goal line guy.
Yeah.
If you're not going to use Jack Coletto, I like Fenwick down there. So I know that's Carter. It's all based on trying to keep these guys from transferring. That's what it's about.
Well, once the Angie Machado office in the Valley Football Center is up and running, you know that you will see a featured back in this offense.
Exactly.
But unfortunately,
can I have a parking spot too?
Yeah. Hey, parking at Reeser is a lot more difficult during the week now than it was a week ago before students got back. But we digress. Jonathan Smith also on Monday, of course, addressed Chance Nolan's struggles in the passing game. That was, probably the biggest storyline to come out of that USC game. Chance Nolan's 4 picks, potentially, I don't want to say the 4 picks cost Oregon State the game, but they were one of the many things that were the difference in that game.
That USC scored 10 points off of picks.
Yeah. Smith highlighted that a lot of it was actually largely due to just a lack of protection. Some of those interceptions, you had Nolan throwing off his back foot, or he was on the run and he was just trying to find a guy to throw it to before he got sacked. And there is an element of truth to that. In fact, Kyle Whittingham in his Monday press conference was asked the same thing and gave the same answer. A lot of that was protection based for Nolan's struggles against USC. But Smith also addressed that Chance Nolan needs to make better decisions with the ball. We can't be throwing it over the middle of the field when we're under pressure. We can't be looking to feed it into a tight window when you've got a defender breathing down your neck.
Because Chance Nolan is not Caleb Williams.
Yeah.
I mean, that throw Caleb Williams made for that final touchdown was pretty good.
Yeah. So I guess what I'm saying there is that there is more to it than just quarterback play when it comes to interceptions, and Jonathan Smith definitely recognized that. Again, if you're looking at that and saying, oh, well, that's just Jonathan's way of defending his quarterback. Well, Kyle Whittingham agreed too. So
it is, but that's where a veteran quarterback needs to know to throw it away or to even take a sack.
A couple of the other interviews that were conducted throughout the week. Shout out to a couple of the new Beaver Blitz members, that staff members that were down there to get video for us this week. Ava Bruce and Katie Zagata. Yes, thank you. Still new. They're still new faces, but they're grabbing videos for us throughout the week now, saving Angie and I a little bit of time to drive down all the way down there. But they gathered videos from Trent Bray, Brian Lindgren, a couple of offensive guys and defensive guys. And Angie, I'm curious what your takeaways from those interviews were. I'll give you a couple of mine. First of all, Trent Bray, happy birthday.
Did he really say he's 40?
Yep.
Wow.
Yep. Yeah.
Did not know that.
Trent Bray turning 40 on Wednesday. He actually, if you watch the video up on our YouTube at Beaver Blitz video, he was drenched, absolutely drenched, and it wasn't because it was raining out there. There was a video from the equipment team's TikTok of the players kind of holding him there by his arms, and then a giant water bucket was dumped on him. So that was kind of his birthday celebration on the practice field there.
Don't ever do that to me on my birthday. Just saying. No, it was good.
Yeah.
To see that.
Yeah. Tyjon Lindsey, I think, was the best interview of the week, in my opinion. The insight he provided on how Oregon State responded to that loss and how they're looking to bounce back this week was second to none. He mentioned the leadership that he has seen from not only the captains, but everybody on this team coming up to each other, saying, it stinks, but we have a big opportunity this week to get a win as big, if not bigger, than the one we could have got last week. Brandon Kipper, after the game on Saturday, you could hear the passion and the emotion in his voice that this means so much to him. That this team is going to come out with their hair on fire in Salt Lake City. And I don't think that loss to USC is gonna carry over at all.
I don't either. And I was asked this on another, I've been on a few Salt Lake radio shows and podcasts, but they were asking about, Oregon State having a letdown after losing to USC. And I don't see that. That's where I think this veteran team really stands together. This is going to be a team that regroups. You remember last year, the Beavs was coming off that really emotional loss up at Washington State when they came back to Reser and beat Utah so handily. So I think this team is going to have kind of a gut check here. And if this was a young team, I might feel a little different, but this is such a veteran-led team. Even the non-captains of, a guy like Tyjon, who is a strong leader, but not a captain. These guys are taking control, and they're, very vocal. I mean, Jaden Grant, Brandon Kipper, the crew.
The line of the week from all of the interviews was Tyjon Lindsey saying, we can't let USC beat us twice. And what he meant by that is, obviously USC got that 17-14 win at Reser, but we can't.
They can't live in their head.
We can't ruminate on that. We can't let that hold us back from playing up to our potential next week. We can't play like, we're just going in there not to lose. We have to use that as motivation, and I'm very confident that Oregon State will. I mean, this is probably the most mature group that we have covered as long as I've been at Beaver Blitz.
Absolutely. Like I said, I don't want to give too much away, but I think this is going to be a very, very positive game for Oregon State.
So let's switch gears momentarily. We're going to come back to football, and we're going to come back to Oregon State's game at Utah. But since we're kind of on the news trend here with this last segment, just want to highlight a couple of schedules that were released today. So men's basketball, actually, you saw this throughout the conference. All of the men's basketball schedules were finalized today. Yesterday, on Wednesday, I think, was actually the first official day of practice. So men's basketball season is gearing up, and we'll be covering that.
Is it? I thought first official day of practice starts like Saturday. Isn't that Midnight Madness all across the country?
I know a couple of teams started yesterday.
Okay.
Yeah, I believe Oregon State started on Wednesday.
Okay.
I'm sure that some teams will still hold their Friday Night Lights and Midnight Madness and whatnot. But a couple of notes from this men's basketball schedule. Again, we'll get back to football here in just a second. The season opens Monday, November 7th against Tulsa. That game will be on the Pac-12 network at Gill Coliseum at 9 p.m. Angie, 9 o'clock in the evening. Not
on a Monday night.
9
That's a school night.
On a Monday.
Carter, I'm old. I got kids in school. I'm going to be asleep by then.
Yeah, I'm not looking forward to that. The 8 p.m. football kickoffs get me too. But a handful of ESPN games for the men's basketball team this year. Interestingly, no games on Fox or FS1, and then the rest will be on the Pac-12 network. So after that dreadful season last year, not as much national airtime for the Beavs this year.
They all got burned last year.
Yeah. The baseball schedule was also released this morning.
Yes.
On Thursday, the baseball season will open February 17th versus New Mexico in Surprise, Arizona, as it always does. The home opener for the reigning Pac-12 baseball tournament runner-up / conference runner-up. I mean, I don't even know how we refer to these things with the tournament in there anymore. The conference runner-ups will return home on I have this as
November.
November 24th, but it's February
February.
24th versus Coppin State for that first home series. Gonna be cold at Goss for sure, so bundle up. One more note from that schedule is that Pac-12 play actually closes on May 14th for the Beavers this year, very early, of course, with the conference tournament pushing everything back by a week. And then Oregon State actually gets their quote unquote bye week, when they play a non-conference team in the final weekend of the regular season. So just wanted to highlight those things since they were in the news today. Obviously, schedule releases are very big news. And we will be covering both of those sports when their seasons arise. But we've got about 15 minutes left here, Angie, to talk Oregon State versus Utah. We're going to highlight our keys to the game here, and then we'll run through the rest of the Pac-12 slate to close things out. Offensively, Angie, you have anything different from what I have in the rundown here?
No. Well, two things. I want to go back to my key from last week, which was establish a run, because I think if Oregon State can establish a run, keep the ball out of Utah's offense's hands, that's a huge positive. But I'm going to have to agree with yours as well, because that was, I think, the key to the loss against USC. I'll let you talk about that. My
offensive key is that Oregon State just has to cut down on turnovers. I mean, you look at the Boise State game, and it had, what was that, 3 picks and a fumble? Chance Nolan, of course, throwing 4 picks against USC. Probably the main reason for that loss to the Trojans, like you just said. I just think it's important to hold on to the ball in games like this where you're playing a highly ranked opponent and you know that you have to value every possession, especially if this game is on the lower scoring end, like I think you and I both kind of expect it to be, a battle of the defenses again. In those low scoring games, every scoring opportunity matters just a little bit more. And when you're on the road, things get even more, you really have to take care of the ball on the road because your opportunities are already going to be fewer and far between in a hostile environment. So all of that to say, Oregon State is not going to win this game if it turns the ball over four times. I mean, it's just not. It didn't last week, and I don't think it will this week. So in order to win this game, and we'll talk about the defense in a sec, but I think the defense has to live up to the performance that it had last week. But offensively, you just can't afford to give Utah that many more extra possessions.
Yeah. I do like that the game is earlier, that it's not a night game at Rice Eccles, because I think the fans won't be quite as rowdy. Unlike Nathan, who was kind of wondering how Oregon State will show up. Oregon State practices in the morning, so I don't see this being an issue for them. They practice. They in practice at 11:30 every day, so that's not going to be, I don't think, an issue for them. Altitude could be a little bit. But yeah, they have to protect the ball and establish a run game and kind of control the clock. If you're controlling the clock on offense and getting to the quarterback and getting some takeaways on defense, recipe for success.
It's a good point about the practice times, and Jonathan actually talked about this on Monday. He said he's really going to sell to the team that this is no different for us than just any other day on the practice field, because Oregon State does show up to the practice field at 9:30, 10 in the morning, and they wrap up around 11:30 and head over and talk to us for a lot longer than they would hope to.
They love it.
But no, it's, Oregon State always practices in the morning, and so I don't think going to Utah and playing in the morning is going to be much of a shock. It will be different in that all of Oregon State's games to this point have been in the evening or late at night. So from a fan perspective, certainly, it's a much different game day experience, and for me, I mean, I'll be getting to the stadium at like 10 a.m. So I'm hoping that
but you're not going to be up till like 2 in the morning.
That's true.
Writing. You'll get to watch you'll get to watch Pac-12 after dark.
Yeah, hopefully they've got some nice breakfast options at Rice Eccles for the media. But I think that covers things offensively. Angie, if you have a defensive key that you want to throw out here, go for it.
Well, I think 2. I think okay. I think they have to have some takeaways. So just like the offense needs to cut the turnovers down, I'd like to see the defense get a couple. I'd like to be net positive on turnover margin, and I'd love to see them pressure Cam Rising as much as they did Caleb Williams. I think getting pressure on him, I'd like to see them actually go get home and tackle him and sack him a few more times. But just that 11 quarterback hurries was a thing of beauty last week.
So just like you, my defensive keys are twofold. I like to limit it to one on each side of the ball, but some weeks I just feel like, that last game provided us with something that we really want to see improved upon. So this week, I've got taking Dalton Kincaid out of the equation as one of the keys. And I just think that's important in a week like this where Utah is down probably its best offensive player in Brant Kuithe. I mean, this is a tight end who has terrorized the Pac-12 over the last couple of years, reigning all first teamer, I think, in the conference in Kuithe, and somebody that, as Nathan said earlier, is not afraid to line up as a running back, as a slot receiver, as a blocking tight end. I mean, somebody who can do it all. And so if Oregon State can take Dalton Kincaid out, his position mate and the only go-to target on this team right now is as far as history serves, those two guys are the guys. And with Kincaid being really the focal point of that offense, keying in on him and taking him out of the equation is going to be big, because if Oregon State does that, then Utah is forced to move the ball in ways that it hasn't before. And like I said against USC last week, scoring early, getting USC off script is big because it makes them uncomfortable.
Yeah.
I think this week taking Dalton Kincaid out of the equation accomplishes a similar thing where you're forcing Utah to get things done in a different way than they're used to. But I'm rambling here because I have two keys. But you mentioned that you want to see Oregon State continue to get pressure on the quarterback, get home, bring Cam Rising down. I'm similar in that, but my key is actually just to contain the pocket.
Yeah, you don't want to let him go run.
Yeah,
because
if it comes at the cost of maybe not actually sacking him, so be it. But you can't let Cam Rising beat you on the edge with his legs, because he is too fast of a quarterback for you to rely on that to slow that offense down.
And mobile quarterbacks has been the Oregon State kryptonite for years.
Yeah. I mean, even if Oregon State puts up a similar line as it did last week with all of those QB hurries, but very few sacks, I'm okay with that this week because Rising does have that breakaway speed. So containing the pocket, holding him inside that tackle box and generating pressure within it, certainly, but not letting him get outside of it.
I'm making fun of Carter using his hand signals here.
Hey,
if you're listening on the podcast, he's outlining the pocket. If you're not watching, it's not making any sense, but that's fine. We have fun on the damn podcast.
So those are our offensive and defensive keys. We laid out a lot of them this week, so we're only going to revisit a couple after the game. But as we always do on Sundays, we'll touch on those and see if Oregon State delivered on some of our keys. In the past, I will say through 4 games, we're pretty good. If Oregon State delivers on our keys, the game usually goes well. If they don't, they struggle. So I guess take that as proof that we at least know a little bit about what we're talking about.
Tiny bit.
Connor Johnson in the YouTube chat asks, "Where's Julian?" We'll touch on this before we move on to our final segment, because we didn't talk about Alton Julian in our brief little injury update. Jonathan Smith actually did address this injury in particular on Monday. Basically said, Oregon State, quite frankly, is set at the safety position right now. They're not in a position where they need to rush Alton Julian back from a serious injury. And while they want him out there, they're going to make sure that he's at 100% and has enough time on the practice field and is truly ready to go full speed before they put him back out there.
I mean, ACL tear is a full year, and we're not there yet. So he is practicing. He has been suited up the past 2 weeks. But yeah, I mean, they don't need him. So why risk the injury?
Around the Pac-12.
Okay. I haven't even looked at who the Pac-12 is playing this week. Let's see.
Well, so much for my segue. I was just going to ask what your Pac-12 game of the week was.
You know what? I'm looking at it right now.
Okay. Is Oregon State Utah your game of the week?
That is the game of the week. I mean, obviously, but so Washington is a 2.5 point favorite at UCLA. I don't see this love of UCLA. I think they flat out suck. Sorry, but I'm going to be completely honest here.
So Chip Kelly's getting fired at the end of the season. Is that what you're saying?
I don't see this media love of UCLA. I mean, they beat a bunch of nobodies, and they barely did that. So I don't know. Sorry, that's my rant. That is my weekly rant. I'm taking Washington on that one, Carter, by a lot more than 2.5.
Washington's a 2.5 point betting favorite. That's a Friday night game on ESPN. So Friday at 7:30, Washington goes down to an empty Rose Bowl. Not going to be anybody there.
Oh,
They're giving away tickets.
Yeah, and if they get 2,000 or
For free.
5,000, it's dumb. Washington by a ton. Okay, Cal at Washington State. That might be the next most intriguing game on the slate.
Yeah, I'll give a shout out to the Locked On Pac-12 podcast. I've been on there pretty much weekly throughout the season, previewing some of the games, and from an Oregon State perspective, but also going down the line of the Pac-12 games. And this is the game that we picked as one of the more. It feels like Vegas is maybe selling Washington State short. Is kind of the consensus we came to there. It feels like to me, if Washington State hadn't collapsed at the end there against Oregon, we'd be talking about the Cougs as a double-digit favorite here. Instead, they're a 4-point favorite against the Golden Bears.
But the Golden Bears are coming to the Palouse. I don't know. I think the Cougs look pretty decent. Arizona, Colorado.
So this line to me is shocking. Colorado right now. So I'll tell you where it opened. It opened at Arizona -9.5, and right now it's up to Colorado's now a 17.5 point underdog. If Colorado loses by more than 2 touchdowns and a field goal, I think we're talking about the Buffs as probably the worst team in college football, and I don't think that would be much of a stretch to lose to Arizona by that much.
But the next one,
I mean,
Arizona State. Sorry, okay.
I was just going to say, I mean, if Colorado does lose by that much, and it truly is as bad as it looks, we could be talking about Oregon State being favored by as much as 30 in that game at Reeser a couple of weeks from now.
Yeah, that's brutal. And then I'm looking next game on the docket is 7:30 kick. Arizona State is a 25-point dog to USC. Wow. Yeah.
That program's in shambles. That opened at USC -17.5. It's up to 25 now. That could be a 40-point win for the Trojans. Just the way that they have played. I mean, you throw out the Oregon State game, offensively, USC is probably capable of hanging 60 on the Sun Devils.
Yeah. And then the last game, it's a nightcap. It's the after dark 8:00 kick. Stanford at Oregon. And Stanford's a 17-point dog. Started as a 10.5 point.
I don't have a read on this one. My only takeaway is that Stanford gets such Pac-12 treatment of playing back-to-back 8 p.m. games. The Cardinal come up to Oregon, play at 8 p.m. on FS1, and then the next week host Oregon State on the farm at 8 p.m. again on ESPN. I'll be there for Beaver Blitz in my pajamas at 3 in the morning, working at Stanford Stadium. Not looking forward to an 8 p.m. kickoff. I will tell you that much.
I was supposed to be across the country for that game, so it would have been a 11 p.m. kickoff.
Very few silver linings with Hurricane Ian over there, but I guess if there is any in your case, it's that you will not be up until 6 a.m. watching this game.
I was supposed to be in Fort Myers, Cape Coral. Not going there. Prayers to everyone in Southwest Florida because it's horrendous. So I just want your quick take on Stanford, Carter, because do you think they are as bad as I think they are?
No.
For Stanford.
No, I don't think they're terrible, but I think they're a team that next week we're talking about. I think we're talking about next week an opponent that Oregon State's expected to beat by a couple of scores. You know, I think Stanford has slid enough that I wouldn't be shocked to see Oregon cover this 17-point spread at Autzen, and I wouldn't be shocked to see Oregon State go down there and beat them pretty handily too. But I do think they still have enough talent up and down that roster to put up a fight a bit against pretty much anybody in the conference. But I don't know. There's something missing.
Willingham, Stanford bad.
Yeah. There's
But,
something missing with the Cardinal.
something's. And there, did you see EJ Smith is out
Yeah,
for the season now? So he
Yeah.
was their
tough blow.
star running back. Anyway.
Tough blow. Looking ahead a little bit there to Oregon State's Week 6 matchup, but Week 5 on Saturday, 11 a.m. Pacific, Oregon State at Utah at Rice-Eccles Stadium. I will be there. I'm heading out to Utah very soon. So if anybody has any Salt Lake City recommendations, you can tweet at me. Let me know where I need to go to dinner, because I will be off before dinner on Saturday for the first time this season. So I will take any recommendations you will give me. We'll be back on Sunday, probably, to recap that game. It's a travel day for me, so we're gonna see if we can fit that into our schedule.
It may be Monday, however.
It may be a Monday recap episode this week, but we will keep you apprised of that situation. Until then, you can follow Angie on Twitter at Angie Machado 1. You can follow me at Carter Bahns. Stick with Beaver Blitz for game coverage, recaps, instant analysis, and more on Saturday as Oregon State travels to number 12 Utah. And we'll be back Sunday or Monday for another episode of the Damn Podcast.